3 houses, 4 routes leave the continent of Fodlan in vastly different situations depending on which route the player picks. Last time we looked into the Black Eagles route's ending, but now we'll be delving into the Azure Moon ending. I said this in my last video in the Fate of Fodlan series, but I'll say it again just to be clear. My goal in this series is to take a fair and honest look at each of the endings regardless of how I feel about them to create the most clear image of the pros and cons of each ending. Any difference in opinion when it comes to the validity of each ending comes down to personal philosophy due to the game's excellent writing. Alright, now let's get into analyzing the Azure Moon ending to see if the Savior King can live up to his name and can actually save Fodlan from all of its long-standing issues. To learn more about the general direction that Dimitri's vision for the future would move in, it's important to understand the history of Fargus and the state in which Dimitri inherited the kingdom. The Holy Kingdom of Fargus was founded when Lug rebelled against the Adrestian Empire to declare the independence of his new nation. There was an inevitable conflict of secession, and eventually, Lug was able to defend his land and the church would come to legitimize Fargus' claim to independence. So the newly formed Holy Kingdom of Fargus would come to maintain a very healthy relationship with the church, and would start a tradition of chivalry among the nobility that would be an integral part of the kingdom's essence. When we come to find Fargus at the start of the game, it seems to be in a state of flux while maintaining some distinct aspects of its identity. The state of Fargus at the start of the game is politically unstable, while still managing to hold strong in its traditions of nobility and chivalry. A plague ravaged through Fargus in 1165, causing many of its people to die, and while a young mage named Cornelia was able to cure it, this plague would still leave a lasting impact on Fargus. Then, in 1173, the true inciting incident of Fargus' political unrest started when the tragedy of Dusker took place. This event resulted in the death of King Lambert Blaethid, but would also ruin the relationship between Fargus and the land of Dusker. Beyond larger political implications, the event itself deeply impacted Dimitri's psyche and personal philosophy, becoming a primary driving force behind many of his actions throughout the course of the game. Through the course of White Clouds, there were a series of missions that the player would undertake, where they would be assisting in maintaining law and order within the kingdom. Lord Leonardo himself started a rebellion against the church and consequently Fargus due to their relationship. Bandits would run amok within the kingdom, as shown in your interactions with Niklon and his bandits, and there is no permanent king for the time being, with Dimitri's uncle merely acting as a regent. It's evident that Dimitri needs to focus on restoring the kingdom to its former stability, yet he becomes consumed with revenge. And although he's consumed with a desire for revenge for most of the game, Dimitri eventually snaps out of it after the Battle of Gronder. Specifically after Rodrigue died at the Battle of Gronder Field within Azure Moon, Dimitri ends up moving beyond his desire for revenge. He ends up reorienting himself towards serving the living while he still can, to make the suffering that people face meaningful by changing his war plan to focus on saving his people. Dimitri ends up liberating Ferdiad from the Agarthan court mage Cornelia, and shortly thereafter he redirects his troops to protect Deirdre from the Empire, where he incidentally kills the leader of the Agarthans, Talus. Finally, Dimitri invades Enbar and thoroughly defeats the Empire by killing Edelgard and ending the war. This route leaves the church as a fundamental structure of Fodlan still, but has a diminished role since Rhea abdicates her position as Archbishop. The Agarthans are only tangentially defeated during Azure Moon, and only seem to be defeated insofar as most of their leadership is killed through the war. All of Fodlan also becomes consequently unified due to the Leicester Alliance consenting to becoming enfranchised in the kingdom, and the Empire falling under the kingdom's control after the war.
A rising flame was alight as the flow of time carved a new history for Fodlan. The long reign of the Adrestian Empire finally met its end when the imperial capital, the city of Enbar, collapsed. After 5.5 years of war, a new age was set to begin. With Fodlan united as the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, Archbishop Rhea, still weak from her imprisonment, stepped down from her position. The Church of Saros began to take the needed steps to reorganize. Prince Dimitri formally ascended the throne, beginning his reign as the king of the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, which now included former Alliance and Imperial territories. Texts from the time claimed that the one who guided the king as he sought to create a world free from oppression became the new Archbishop of the Church of Saros.
With all this context in mind, we can now evaluate some of the good and bad aspects of the Azure Moon ending, starting out with the positives. Through his personal journey in Azure Moon, Dimitri learns to orient his energies towards the living rather than the dead, and his new philosophy seems like it will deeply inform his ruling style moving forward. Dimitri has always been fixated on justice, but he would exercise two different forms of it, those of punitive and restorative justice, which were both in constant conflict. Dimitri's character development would help him learn how to reconcile the two by coming to understand the necessity of both types, and that the use of violence doesn't make someone a monster. He decides to work towards creating a better world for the living, where all can live free from oppression, even if he will have to use violence to achieve those ends.
I swear it wasn't in vain.
Removing oppression is the key theme here, and it's referenced in the ending of Azure Moon because fundamentally Dimitri seeks to create a world where people can understand one another.
I believe those with crests and those without should acknowledge the other's strengths and learn to respect each other based on personal merits. And that doesn't apply only to crests. The same holds true for lineage, race, faith, ideologies. If we could just accept each other and make mutual concessions, one step at a time, perhaps... Who knows if that's even possible?
In Dimitri's ending, the narrator mentions his joint effort with Byleth as the head of the Church of Saros to create a new world free from oppression, and the mural of the ending itself shows that he's certainly successful in moving towards such a goal. With the army of Fargus providing bread to the needy after the war, citizens of Duscur clamoring around Dimitri conveying an age of reconciliation between the Kingdom of Duscur, and Dimitri's sheathed Aradbar representing an end to the conflict. Dimitri's ending also mentions some of the measures that he would take to create a more free and open Fodlan by mentioning how he focused particularly on improving living situations for orphans and improving foreign relations, and by instituting a new form of government in which the people were free to be active participants. This is the most interesting proposition because it seems that Dimitri paves the way for a government that allows all citizens a form of representation of some kind in this new apparent constitutional monarchy, truly allowing people to openly participate in government. Dimitri expresses just how important empowering people is to him in both his support chain with Byleth and in his confrontation with Edelgard. He expresses to Byleth how he admires Rodrigue and how he could save others.
While Dedu is like a brother to me, Rodrigue is more like a second father. It might sound ridiculous, but he's the kind of man I hope to become one day. Someone who helps others. Someone who can reach out and save a lost soul.
And expresses to Edelgard his objections to her goals in critiquing the forceful nature of her conquest.
And do you intend to become a goddess yourself? Will you steal the power to take action from the broken-hearted masses you claim to defend? The ones who can truly change the way of the world are not the rulers, but the people. Pushing your own sense of justice and your own ideals onto even one other person is nothing more than self-righteousness.
In his new world, Dimitri will empower all those who he can, while also providing charity for all who need it. His solo ending goes so far as to say that he lived for his people and alongside them, and was thusly dubbed the Savior King, showing just how appreciated he is by the people of the newly unified kingdom. While I've painted a very positive picture of the Azure Moon ending, there are quite a few negatives that are prominent, primarily by things which are not addressed. The Azure Moon ending leaves a lot to be desired insofar as fulfilling some major lore and thematic elements of the game goes. The primary issues being that Dimitri doesn't thoroughly destroy those who slither in the dark, nor does his ending comprehensively address the issue of crests. These two negatives will be deal breakers for a lot of people. Three Houses largely builds up the villains of the Agarthans as a major contributor to Fodlan's strife, yet Dimitri doesn't directly deal with them and only consequently eliminates some of its leaders, leaving Shambhala undisturbed and a potential for the Agarthans to come back in the future. Dimitri's paired ending with Happy does make some reference to him exposing the Agarthans, but it leaves a lot to be desired when compared to the thorough destruction that the other routes would outline. Also, narratively, it's pretty unsatisfying to play the whole game seeing the villains behind most of the game's conflict and only being able to tangentially defeat them in fighting against the Empire. The major issue of the crest system also isn't as thoroughly addressed as it is in other routes, which will leave many to be unsatisfied since Edelgard and Claude both eliminate the crest system from Fodlan to promote equality. In this regard, Dimitri doesn't match the other two in their actions on crests, predominantly because he doesn't seem to think that eliminating crests is a viable solution to inequality and conflict. While he might not think that abolishing the crest system itself is necessary, it definitely needs to be addressed at least to a limited extent. Blue Lions like Sylvain, Mercedes, and Ingrid have had their lives profoundly negatively affected by crests, and while removing the nobility or crests isn't necessarily the only solution, there has to be some sort of change in how things are done. Now, who ultimately won and lost in the Azure Moon route? Well, as far as collective groups go, the Kingdom is the biggest winner, through winning the war and being restored by its new king. The Leicester Alliance doesn't necessarily lose, since they consented to being enveloped within the new kingdom. The Church of Saros also doesn't lose because they are able to retain their authority while reforming their practices to create a more just world. But the Adrestian Empire loses pretty significantly, being crushed by the Kingdom's army, and subsequently being absorbed into the United Kingdom. As far as the death tally goes, however, this route has the least deaths, with all major characters potentially surviving, with the exceptions of Edelgard and Hubert, and some members of the Adrestian Empire and Leicester Alliance, should you not recruit all the students. Claude and Rhea both survive, with Claude returning to Elmira and Rhea going to Xanadu to live the rest of her days as a hermit, much like Saint Maquil and Indek. And obviously Dimitri is the biggest winner in this ending because he's finally able to move past his tragedies and learns to live to make the world a better place. The Azure Moon route isn't a radical one insofar as social change or deaths goes, which can either be good or a bad thing depending on how one looks at it. But it does seem to imply a move towards long-term reform that seeks to create a more just and kind world for the people of the United Kingdom. And while the issues of the crest system, nobility, and Agarthans aren't thoroughly addressed, the ending certainly still has a lot of merit. Dimitri seeks to create a new empowering system that enfranchises everyone, while working towards creating a more understanding world, where issues like the conflict between Duscur and Fargus can be resolved. In this sense, Dimitri really does live up to his title of the Savior King through taking measured steps towards a more just world. Hey, thank you for watching. To be honest, this route is my personal favorite ending, which probably has something to do with the Blue Lions being my first route. What I really like about this ending is how it reflects Dimitri's own character development through the story in this fully realized new kingdom oriented towards justice. I hope that all of you who don't care for this ending gain some new appreciation for it, and feel free to discuss what you think in the comments below. Once again, thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video.